The problem with like, oh, I'm going to scoop in and buy Airbnb properties. Most people who bought Airbnb properties overpaid, over remodeled, and over furnished. Where it's like, that's why they were in so much trouble, is the only way they were cash flowing or breaking even was off of that premium.
Welcome to the Good Stewards Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards Podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius.
Good morning, good stewards. May is well on its way, and we've definitely been as proactive as possible in our businesses to be prepared for who knows what's coming. Kind of feels like the opening day of, or the opening scene of Independence Day around here lately. But before we dive in, we do want to connect with you. Make sure you check us out at thegoodstewards.com. Obviously, subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends because, well, we're awesome. And make sure you snag your free copy of our ebook. Now, I kind of want to just dive right in here to kind of what I've seen in my local market, what I've seen from the investors that are inside my mastermind. And then I'll let Andrew and Amanda talk about things like economics because I'm not that well versed. So what we've really seen, wholesale deals are still selling. We got a deal under contract on Monday, had it assigned by Tuesday. Wholesale deals are still closing. We had a deal that was a couple weeks old that closed a couple days ago for a $20,000 net to us profit. And on top of that, we had two kind of wholesale properties we listed on the MLS that both flew off the shelf. One sold in, I think, 12 hours. The other went in under 72. And if I'm being blunt, these were like your two-tone ugly rentals that we listed for 100% of ARV. One of them sold for over our asking price, didn't appraise, wasn't shocked. But the other one, we took a 1031 cash offer for $5,000 below our list. So one thing that I do think is kind of important to point out with what I'm seeing in my market is these are primarily nicer properties. I would say A- to B class, your kind of first time home buyer, vinyl villagey, nicer assets, think like attached 2-car garage. We haven't done a whole bunch of deals lately that have been in the lower end or kind of like the higher end, fix and flip. So I think that that's part of it is just kind of desirable inventory. But I mean, that's really what we're seeing. Stuff is still selling. Stuff is still moving. We've actually seen an uptick in leads from February and March into March and April. I don't know. What are you guys seeing?
Kind of the same. So we've, in various different locations, we've continued to close. I think we've closed since COVID 3 properties. We've closed a couple of refinances that were in process. We've started refinances during this process. And I mean, not related to this, my sister who lives in Oregon, she listed her house on Sunday this week. And they're expecting an offer today. They've had tons of showings in the house. And again, it goes back to, it is kind of a first-time homebuyer product. And I think that's a really strong place to be. So that's not to say, we do have a development here that is higher end, really nice houses on small lots. They have been flying off the shelves. I attribute that to mortgage rates, which are still low, although it's taking longer to close, but they're still closing. We've continued to close houses in our new development in Oregon. So, and those are, those are like higher end, like 1,700 to 2,200 square feet on very tiny lots. And the price point is around $500,000. And those are closing.
What did you refi'd, Amanda? What was your rate at and what did you get?
3.125.
Yep.
Pretty excited about that.
Noah did the same, and I think his payment on his house went from like 12 or 1300 down to like 890. So
rates are good. I have heard from various investors that banks are getting tight with LTVs. They're pushing those down. But rates
some lines of credit I've heard have
yeah.
been pulled back as well.
Yeah, there's an uptick in forbearance agreements. So the mortgage industry is teetering a bit, and we're not sure which direction it's going to break. The rates are so low because the Fed keeps basically printing money and pushing them down. But at the same time, they have a lot of increased forbearance, risk of defaults, all sorts of issues like that. So, and no one really knows what the government's going to do. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. But if you can get a loan, get it. I mean, if you need one and you can get one, there's certainly you can't beat the rates right now.
I have banks, 2 of our regional banks that we have loans with in Oregon. They have asked me for our rent collection numbers for April. And that's nothing that they would ever be checking on. But I think, basically they wanted kind of to take our temperature of how we were doing. And, luckily we're in pretty good shape. But, I gave them the information they wanted. And I think a lot of them, I think they're probably just testing, like, are we going to keep our line of credit extended with them, that sort of thing. And, I've never had them ask for that kind of information, but I think they're just trying to be proactive
there's other issues. Like our leasing has gone actually accelerated, which is interesting. We've had no break at all, and actually an uptick in leasing activity. We've had a few issues with sales, mostly not with activity. We've been getting plenty of interest. We haven't been selling much, but with one house, we had one person back out right when the crisis broke. They got scared. And then another person backed out on a house because they lost their job right after they got it under contract because of coronavirus. And so we finally got it again under contract. It looks like it's going to sell now. So we've had some issues like that. But for the most part, it seems like activity is still pretty strong. It's definitely strong in the leasing market. And it sounds like the only major change that I've seen thus far, although I've seen plenty of things about, like there's a CNBC report about the expected volume of housing sales to go down 35%. Doesn't appear that that's happened yet, but if this continues for the long term, I expect those trends to accelerate. Right? If it's a short term blip, probably won't be a big thing. But I mean, that's one of the things with regards to just even taking advantage of the situation is trying to get an eye of how long and how deep this is going to be before really going all in and making a big play would be my recommendation. Sure, don't stop buying if you're buying, but while there's still uncertainty about how long and how deep this is going to be, I'd be careful about making big decisions. Plays.
Yeah, I know in Indy, I mean, we had a couple properties actually that were sitting that we were having a hard time filling that we've now filled. To some people in the medical field, which is like, whoa, yeah, they're going to be there for a minute. I do think, you got to just be careful with any of the stats or articles you're getting or reading, because I saw one that was talking about rent collection in April that was like 35% of people didn't pay their rent, and then if you read in their article when they did the study the previous year, it was like 25% of people were late. So really there was a 10% dip based off their data. But I've even had a couple buddies be like, I don't know where they're getting their stats. It's not from me.
That was posted around a variety of real estate investment forums, and people were like, this has nothing to do with my experience. It sounded actually like maybe it was more of a New York thing. I could see it being more concentrated in higher rent cities,
like a New York, San Francisco.
$1,200 will get you by in Kansas City and Indianapolis, for the most part in Eugene, where we're located here. It will not get you by in New York or San Francisco.
Real weird side note about the stimulus. I had to go to the spa place to pick up like a vacuum cleaner for our hot tub yesterday. And I kind of just asked, the girl working, I said, so, I'm surprised you guys are open. Are you staying busy? And she goes, oh, we've sold 30 hot tubs in the last 3 days. And I was shocked to hear that, because basically she goes, I guess people are using their stimulus money to buy hot tubs. And, they're home a lot. And I was like, oh, well, good. I was like, I'm glad you guys are thriving, but I am shocked to hear your business is thriving. because
of all the niches I saw doing well with this, hot tubs was
hot
not one
tubs
of
was
them.
exactly. But I was like, whoa, okay, well, good for you. But
I
wow.
will throw out, just because I think it's worth mentioning. I would pay special attention to your vacants right now if you can. We had somebody break into a property in Indianapolis and literally remove our entire kitchen, like appliance cabinets. Even tried taking the granite; it cracked. So I think they decided to leave it.
They didn't
But
take everything. They left the trim above the countertop.
they
So
left
they
our
left a
ugly
backsplash.
backsplash.
Yeah.
Like, of all the things they could have taken, that could have gone. So, I mean, I would just say, and we were out at the property on Friday. Everything looked good. Went on Monday to take leasing pictures and it was gone. And it's in a pretty high traffic area. So I would just recommend, if you only have one or two projects going, setting up cameras or it's probably not a bad idea, as you have more people that are bored and looking to potentially cause trouble or potentially out of work.
So going into May, what are your thoughts as far as like buying, Ryan? Like, what are you looking for wholesale wise? Like, are you expecting prices to be about the same? Like, what are you kind of thinking?
So first off, on the volume end, we have 17,000 pieces of mail going out in May. So I realistically expect that to translate into 8 or 9 deals is about what I would expect based off that volume. As far as the values go, for like a minute and a half, we dropped down to 70% of ARV, expecting about a 5% dip. What we've seen on this like first time home buyer-y inventory is it hasn't changed. So we're kind of back at 75% minus repairs. If it's a property we're going to wholesale, obviously subtracting out $8,000 to $10,000 in potential profit, and then pushing it a little bit with our buyers, trying to sell it for not 75%, but maybe 76, 77. That property we shot out on Monday actually needed a pretty decent amount of work. It was in a pretty good area. Sold sight unseen, cash as is, no inspection contingency.
So are you changing the location, like the areas that you're targeting? Are you?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, we've always kind of targeted that niche in Indianapolis. I would say I'm not shying away from low end stuff, but I'm not going particularly after higher end stuff. Of that marketing campaign, I believe 7,000 or 8,000 of it is inherited property owners that we pulled through PropStream, looking for people that got a property they don't want. And the other 10,000 is properties that are basically just kind of like a driving for dollars list almost. So, we're just, I would say for May, I'm still doing what I did in April, which is I'm just pretending everything's normal.
Right.
Like, I have to still function. I still have to show up and go to work. It's not business as usual, but the reason we're making money is because we're still showing up to business as usual. So
right.
I would say it feels really different. I mean, every deal feels kind of like awkward. It's kind of this like, I won't cough on you if you don't cough on me kind of a feel. But, I really think like most of my competitors I know were like, oh yeah, I'm pausing marketing. So I think part of that is that's benefiting us if we're the ones that are still sending stuff out. We've also even had we had a couple sellers who told us absolutely no to our offers, then went to the Better Business Bureau and left us 5-star reviews saying we operated with professionalism.
Oh,
so it's like
nice,
super weird. It was like, okay. So I don't know if it's just like people have more time on their hands. So they're like, well, okay, that was a good interaction. I don't know if it's that, but I mean, I would say, like with our construction in Indianapolis, we're trying to get everything done, get everything on the market as fast as possible. With our leasing stuff, we're trying to get stuff filled with good people. With our marketing, we're still looking for good deals. I would say my comfort level is down, but like our level of activity is not, if that makes sense. Like we're still showing up. It just feels kind of awkward.
Right. I will say like during my workday, it actually kind of does feel business as usual because I'm working in the same space. And, a lot of what I'm doing is the same stuff I was always doing, but every single thing I'm doing takes 4 times as long as it used to. The title companies are aggravating, to say the least. They were always aggravating, but now they're like making me insane with how slow everything takes. And I do understand, and I think basically they've been blasted with all of this refinance activity coming in, and that goes towards, that's taking up all of their bandwidth. But, I think that's fine. Those are some of your customers. But for those customers that are repeat customers, it's like, we want some of your bandwidth too. So, I have to be the squeaky wheel a lot more, and I have to follow up 3, 4, 5 times now when I didn't used to have to. And, I feel like people probably feel that way a little bit about me too. Our jobs sort of exploded, whereas some people, were without things to do. It's weird how many more things came up.
I think as an investor, just extra things got put on your plate of, before it was kind of like you waited for rent to come in and you reached out to people when it didn't. Now it's like, hey, I don't know if you're going to pay rent or not. I would like you to. So here are the resources for you to get money so that you can pay us. So I think that's part of it too.
If we want to talk about rent a little bit. So we've been in all of our markets, we've been we've done pretty well with collections. And I would say of the people that couldn't pay, we've had communication with, I would guess, 80 to 90% of them. They've been really proactive about communicating circumstances and that sort of thing. There's a couple that we just haven't heard from. And I think, there's one in particular that basically said, I'm not going to pay because I don't have to. And that's fine. I mean, eventually you'll have to.
So you don't have to pay for now. That's probably the way to think of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fees still rack up. We've had good luck with that too. I mean, we've had some people, we waived April late fees and offered a free payment plan.
I think we were mandated to waive late fees in Oregon. I think it was our.
Yeah,
I think we weren't allowed to charge them.
I don't believe it was mandated here. We didn't check because we were going to do it anyways, as long as you prove that it was coronavirus related. Unemployment
and
or
not just bad employee related.
Yeah. And we're restructuring a couple leases, like adding it to the April rent adding 12 months to a lease and adding the April rent to, I think we're doing that 2 or 3 leases, but for the most part, we've been able to work it out. I think as long as this doesn't last too long, we should be fine. Although, of course, there's going to be, if it doesn't last that long, there's going to be some price inflation too, just because of all the excess liquidity they pumped into the system.
Right. Yeah, I'm not trying to speculate, but I do think at the beginning of May, we are going to start hearing about the plans for, like our state, for instance, what their plan is to kind of start to open things back up. I mean, it's not just going to go business to usual one day.
No, but that's already happening. I mean, in California, they reopened all the parks. In Georgia. Yep.
Yeah, there's one study came out recently, and since I'm, like all other users of Facebook and Twitter, a licensed epidemiologist, not just like if in case we get serious, I'm not.
Add it to your
I just saw a study interesting that coronavirus
shared by a gun store.
That is something like the number of infected is one sample study in California, which just randomly a Santa Claus study, randomly sampled. Many people came to the conclusion that the reporting rate of coronavirus is 50 to 85 times higher than what's actually being reported, which would mean it's much less deadly. And if that is verified, that's one study, it needs to be verified, then this is really just, it is like it's like another, major super flu, we'll call it, but not much more deadly, just super contagious, in which case it's like, okay, it's probably time to open this up again. But of course that needs to be verified. But I've heard, several southern states are considering opening up again. Really, the epicenter is New York and New Jersey. I think they'll be the latest to do so. But I do think other states, we've already seen some protests and things like that. People are cooped up. I think they are going to, barring extreme circumstances like, the hospitals being overwhelmed, are going to reject this relatively soon. They're not going to accept.
Oh yeah, I'm bored out of my mind.
We actually, we rented a house near the coast that what we were allowed to rent to. Many of the coast cities have been shut down, but we just needed, granted, it was a lot like being in our own house, but being in a different house.
Just a change of scenery.
That we could see a lake from and walk down to a lake. But, it was interesting because I did look, all of the beach stuff is not, you're not allowed to rent it, which, that's a whole nother, like, for the tourist areas. Not that I'm wanting to swoop in and start buying that stuff up, but people who rely on vacation rental income are going to be having issues, especially if they count on it to make their mortgage payments. So
Airbnb industry got raw. It just got wrecked.
Decimated.
We snagged 2 houses for 12 guests in Destin, Florida. It was for like $4,000. It was like next to nothing.
Right. And so that's a potential area for for people who live on coasts, or people who live, I know Kansas City has the Ozarks, the lake of what is it? The Lake of the Ozarks?
Lake of the Ozarks.
Which is
redneck paradise.
Right. But vacation destinations that may have an opportunity to, I feel like there could be price fluctuation there and something to be mindful of.
Part of the problem with I'm going to scoop in and buy Airbnb properties. Most people who bought Airbnb properties overpaid, over remodeled, and over furnished. Where it's like, that's why they were in so much trouble, is the only way they were cash flowing or breaking even was off of that premium. I'll give a quick side tale because we have time for it. And I think it makes a lot of sense to go into this. As a business, you want to make sure that your business is not dependent on a different business. So a buddy of mine owned an exotic car rental company. This was my dream, right? I'm a car guy. I was debated getting into this with him. So they became Turo's largest customer. They had a few hundred Porsches, Range Rovers, Alfa Romeos, all kinds of fun stuff, Mercedes, and everything was on Turo. I won't get into the specifics or air their dirty laundry, but they had a couple problems happen. The big car rental companies, Hertz, Budget, that kind of stuff, lobbied to get a bill passed that any car with an open recall of any kind could not be rented out. Well, the problem with that, Porsche, Range Rover, Alfa Romeo, Mercedes-Benz, will recall the smallest things for their customers, down to we decided to tighten this screw a bit more. So what happened is all of a sudden a lot of their inventory they couldn't rent out, and their model was pretty neat. They were basically leasing properties. They had co-signers that would go and leasing cars, excuse me. They had a co-signer to go and lease 10 or 20 cars. They'd rent them out. They were cash flowing really, really well. So this bill happened. That was kind of phase 1. Phase 2, something happened with Turo, and all of a sudden Turo said, you can no longer use our platform. So all of a sudden they had hundreds of luxury vehicles with $1,000 a month payments and no way to rent them. Very, very reminiscent of Airbnb, in my opinion.
Or WeWork.
Yeah, exactly.
We've talked about this before, but that's a fragile business model that is very susceptible to crises. You want to
Right. When it's working, it's working. Yeah. But yeah. And so, it all plays into, if your business is based on tourism, and I don't think
hits.
Right. A pandemic hits, any of that, you're just wiped out, decimated. And yeah.
I saw a meme today that was I can't wait to be able to use I did this through a pandemic with my kids. It's it's great. You don't want to go to school today? I went to school and there was a pandemic. No, but I think that's a really good thing to just keep in mind of building your business on the back of an industry that you don't control, or on the back of another company that's susceptible to issues or changes. Or one of the other problems they had was Turo changed the pay structure and basically said, you get a smaller cut now, we take a bigger fee. And, I would say it was kind of like owning a condo with an HOA. And the HOA comes in and says, hey, special assessment time. So, I would be just cautious of that with any business model you're looking at. But I will say in some cities, Airbnb owners were required to register, and that is publicly available data. So if you're interested in trying to scoop up some Airbnbs, call your county, see if they make people disclose and if that's a list you can get. If so, there's your next marketing list.
Right. And maybe you make them long-term rentals and you don't repeat the short-term, or maybe you balance them, because maybe if you're an Airbnb person, if you had a little bit of balance, you wouldn't be so decimated by vacancy and, your inability to even rent them and having to give refunds. I don't know exactly how that works. I do have, I had a couple things booked that have, they're offering to reschedule or, but it was over holiday weekends and that sort of stuff. And they're not really giving me credit for the holiday weekend stuff, but.
And I know Airbnb, I mean, we had a booking for an event in San Diego at like a multi-million-dollar property. And it was like a $15,000 rental, and Airbnb just refunded it to us because it was a gathering larger than 10. So, I think that I would say if you're going to get into Airbnb, maybe you have properties that you can rent out conventionally, and maybe you choose to Airbnb them, but you can drop back to that. There was a condo we were looking at in Hawaii about a year ago that we decided not to do because it cash flowed as an Airbnb. It lost money as a conventional rental. So,
Fragile.
I think do what?
Is it fragile?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at something like that, if like, okay, we only have one exit strategy here. Like we don't really have a contingency plan. It's kind of like going into a flip that you can't pivot and keep as a rental, or buying something as a rental and you're overpaying for it, so you can't flip it, right? I would say, if you're on the sidelines right now, my recommendation would be to still ensure that you're getting good deals, that you're following the basic formulas, that you have the equity cushion. I kind of want to pivot to this topic, if you guys don't mind, just because I found it pretty interesting. You guys remember everybody that was like, "Oh, I can't wait for the next recession because I'm just going to go buy. I'm going to go on a buying spree." I think one thing I've found is those people were all talk, because now they're like, "Well, I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to wait and see what happens." But, what are you guys seeing? Are you guys? I know we bought a flip in Eugene, but Andrew, Amanda, are you guys buying any other rentals right now? Or are you just kind of maintaining what you've got and selling stuff that comes up?
We're buying a few, but we're not going crazy. As I kind of said at the beginning of this podcast, we want to start to get a better feel for where the bottom is before we go really large. I mean, we are looking at one portfolio, but right now we've got 2 small houses under contract, and we're going to keep our ear to the ground and keep looking for good deals when they come, but we're not looking to aggressively go after it until, again, the best time to start buying is right before you hit the trough. That way you got a little bit of lead up, but you don't want to buy right at the beginning of the down point, or at least go big. So we are buying, but not aggressively yet. Although I do think we do, once we start to see where that trough is or get a better feel for it, we will start to accelerate our purchasing.
How many? So you guys are buying 2 this month. What do you think you guys normally average a month? I mean, with the exception, I know you've primarily grown by buying portfolios.
Well, no, I mean, at first we primarily bought by buying houses and apartments, small apartments, largely. Then we had a portfolio buying spree. Then we continued buying houses, like individual and small portfolios, like 5 or 3. Then we got behind on our turnover and slowed down for a while, and now we're picked back up. Right now, honestly, it's probably been about 2 a month for the last 18 months. But
I would say in our heyday, we were at
at our
5
heyday, we were
or
buying
10. I mean, a lot.
Our heyday, we were buying 5 or 6 a month, and then the portfolios on top of that. And so, but right now, it's been last 18 months. It's probably been about 2 a month.
So totally off topic, and I've jumped around a ton. So we'll see if our host ever lets me run another one of these again. But I would like to real quickly in closing chat about what I think most buy and hold investors don't talk about, which is every legit buy and hold investor I know has overextended themselves, then started to struggle with property management or construction, or if you're me, both. And then you kind of have to go on this like, okay, I now have to fix what I've bought. and you almost have to pause buying to then begin buying again. I mean, is that most of my friends I know that I've talked to that have portfolios the size of mine have pretty much all said the same thing. The other thing they run into is they have too much debt at a certain point. So they start raising cash through flips or wholesaling or whatever to start to pay stuff down. But would you guys say that's kind of held true across Stewardship's 30 years?
So I can't speak to the beginning of Stewardship and I don't think any of us could because
Bill's not here.
we weren't old enough then to.
I mean, I can speak for it because I know the history, but
yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely because I think what happens is you get in a groove and you think the groove's going to maintain, and so you keep doing that. And I do think overextending yourself on. I mean, I think it's rehab and turnover. I think that is your glut. That's always what you underestimate how much work and money things need. And then to figure out, I mean, it took probably 10 to 15 years to get property management like into a well-oiled machine in Oregon. And there's still been, in the last 10 years, there's been several different iterations of the team ever changing, ever growing. For a long time, maintenance was done really poorly and rehab was done really poorly. And then we had to spend 5 years fixing, that. And so there's always something. It's easier kind of to fix it when more of your properties are occupied than less. And so in Oregon, we've always had, especially in Eugene, we've always had a really tight rental market in that there's just always kind of been a housing crunch here a little bit, except for in the last recession when there really was. It was absolutely a buyer's market, but it's typically a seller's market here. And it probably will continue to be that. There just isn't that much inventory here for the amount of people that are continuing to move into this area. So.
No, I appreciate that, Andrew. I appreciate you chiming in on that. I mean, I think it's really just depends what you're going for. I think if you're going to do onesie twosie and end up with a portfolio of, 20 in 5 or 6 years, it's probably not a problem you'll run into. If you grow more rapidly, it's potentially a problem to run into. But I also love, I saw Andrew recently shares either on Bigger Pockets or social media of, growing for the sake of growth makes no sense. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
Growth for the sake of growth is the philosophy of a cancer. Was the quote.
Well done. That belongs on a shirt or a bumper sticker.
And it is something that's very common. It's not universal, but it's also not destiny to grow too fast and get this glut. So it is something, learn from the mistakes of others if you can, learn from our mistakes as you can.
And feel free to ask us about our mistakes. I mean, I would say one thing with this group, we're not super prideful. I mean, there's a little bit of egos on this podcast, Bill, but I mean, realistically, like we're here to give you guys the ins and outs, and I only poke fun at Bill because he's not here today
to defend himself.
All right, so kind of in closing, one thing I do just want to highlight as we wrap up here is just make sure you kind of keep your composure. A huge shout out to Amanda on this of, a lot of the times in real estate investing, you're dealing with people. It's going to be your lenders, it's going to be your bankers, it's going to be your staff, and it's going to be your tenants, your contractors, et cetera. Half the time I feel like I'm a therapist of like talking people off the ledge of, you can pay rent and stimulus money is coming. I mean, my brother's wife is a great example, hairstylist. She's making more in unemployment between state and federal than she normally made. She's like, this can take its sweet time, right? I mean, she gets to sit at home with the kids for more money. Amanda has done a phenomenal job with private lenders that are not keeping their cool, that are like, hey, what's going on? Or, can I get cashed out or whatever? And I think it's you as a business owner have to always kind of be in the driver's seat of your feelings and your emotions, especially kind of on the logical side. And that's not to say we don't lose our cool at times. Trust me. There's been phone calls amongst the four of us that none of you would want to be on. But it's like at the end of the day, you have to be level-headed. And, with something like COVID happening, I think it's been a really interesting stress test for a lot of businesses, a lot of relationships, a lot of partnerships of like, how do we manage crisis together? So if you're kind of struggling with some of those fears and doubts still, I'd highly recommend just maybe unplugging from the news a little bit, trying to be very logical in how you're looking at things, and just make the best decisions you can based off of the data that you have. Had we there's some things we could have done that other people were doing, like giving discounts off rent or giving people a free month and taking security deposits. States are starting to talk about opening back up and things of that nature. And I think, had we done some of those things, we may have regretted it. Or, even like one of our commercial leases gave us a month off and then just increased our rent every month to make up for it. Had you done something like that with your tenants? If you had a tenant who was already on the edge of being able to pay rent, they're not going to be able to pay the new premium. So overall, I think I'm very happy with how we've handled this so far. We don't have a crystal ball, but we're going to continue to make the best decisions we can based off the data we have at hand. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Good Stewards podcast. Please, please, please subscribe, share, and tell your friends. We are trying to make an impact in real estate investing and kind of be the voice of reason amongst the hype. We appreciate you tuning in. Talk to you guys next time.